At my own wedding reception, my father-in-law leaned in, raised his glass, and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "She's just here for the money." I smiled, a smile I had practiced, perfected, the kind that hides the sting behind lip gloss and wedding glitter. But then, my husband laughed. Laughed. "We all know that," he said, chuckling as if it were the most obvious joke in the world. The laughter from his side of the family followed like an obedient echo. And just like that, my heart dropped. Not all the way to the floor, just enough to make breathing feel like work. I stared at my wine glass, at the soft swirl of red I hadn't even touched yet. My hand stayed still, fingers curled around the stem, but inside I was shaking. My stomach twisted, and my throat went tight with that burning kind of silence, the one you learn to carry when you're used to being talked over. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Our wedding was beautiful, every corner of the room wrapped in gold and ivory. Candles flickered like stars trapped in glass. The flowers, the food, the music, everything was perfect, except for what had just been said, and the fact that my husband didn't flinch. I looked at him. Evan, the man I married hours ago, the man I loved. He wasn't even looking at me. He was already turned toward his cousin, laughing at some follow-up joke I couldn't hear over the buzzing in my ears. I forced myself to take a slow breath. Smile. Keep smiling. Don't cry. Not here. Not now. But my face felt frozen, like it might crack if I moved wrong. My eyes scanned the room. Guests were whispering. Some glanced at me and looked away. Others didn't bother hiding their smirks. I could feel it. The judgment, the assumptions. She's probably just after his inheritance. Must have married up. I knew she looked too polished to be real. They didn't know about the nights I stayed up helping Evan rebuild his credit. They didn't see me skipping meals to save for the down payment. They didn't hear me standing up for him when his own father told him he was too soft to run the family business. I didn't marry Evan for money. Hell, I made more than him when we met, but none of that mattered now. The damage was done, and still, I sat there, smiling. Until I felt a shift, a small one, but real. From across the room, I caught Uncle Martin's eyes. My mother's brother, the only person in the room who looked genuinely upset by what had been said. His brow furrowed, lips pressed together, jaw clenched like he was deciding whether to speak up. And then, he stood. No fanfare, no raised voice, just calm, commanding presence. He tapped the side of his glass with a butter knife and said, "Would the bride like to say something?" The entire room fell silent. Eyes turned to me. Mouths paused mid-sip. Even the DJ froze, one hand hovering over his laptop. I blinked. The smile slipped. My fingers tightened around my clutch, and my heart began to pound, not from fear, but from something else. Something sharper, older. No, I thought, they don't get to laugh at me and walk away, and suddenly, I remembered the envelope, the one I'd brought but never planned to use. The deed. My name is Zara, 34 years old, marketing agency founder, first-generation college graduate, daughter of a high school librarian and a forklift operator, raised in a modest home where we reused wrapping paper and fixed things with duct tape, long before it was a TikTok hack. I've worked for every dollar I have. Nothing was handed to me, which is why, when Evan came into my life 5 years ago, I never thought I'd end up defending myself at my own wedding. We met at a business seminar. Both of us had signed up for the same painfully awkward networking breakfast. He was polished and confident, with that kind of easy charisma that made people laugh even when he said nothing particularly funny. I was tired, caffeinated, and trying to grow a one-woman agency out of a studio apartment that shared a wall with a very musical toddler. Still, there was something about him. The way he asked questions and actually listened, the way he said my name like it was the start of a sentence. We fell into each other fast, maybe too fast. But when you've spent most of your adult life in survival mode, love, real, kind, patient love, feels like a luxury. I told myself I deserved it. Evan came from a very different world. His family had money, old money, the kind that lives in big houses with wine cellars and uses summer as a verb. His dad, Gerald, ran a chain of manufacturing companies. His mom hosted charity brunches that somehow always made the local paper. They weren't cruel, not at first, just distant, formal. I remember the first time Gerald shook my hand. He didn't smile. He just looked me up and down and said, "So, marketing. Interesting?" That was it. No follow-up. I tried. I smiled through it. I brought wine to family dinners, offered help in the kitchen, laughed at stories I didn't find funny. Evan always told me not to take it personally. "They're just protective," he said. "They'll come around." But they never really did. I kept hoping that once the engagement happened, once they saw how much I truly loved him, they'd soften. We planned the wedding ourselves. I didn't want it to be a production, just beautiful, meaningful, and real. I covered a lot of it financially, partly because I could and partly because I didn't want to give them anything else to hold over me. Evan never fought that. He didn't offer to split things either, but I figured that was just how he was raised. Now, standing at that reception, I was realizing maybe I'd been naive. The gold lights glowed softly around the room, bouncing off crystal glasses and floral centerpieces I'd chosen myself. The string quartet played some dreamy instrumental version of a song I used to cry to in college. It was all beautiful, and yet all I could think about was how out of place I still felt, like a guest at my own wedding. The comments, the laughter, Evan's silence, it wasn't just a one-off moment. It was a reflection of something deeper, something I hadn't wanted to admit, that no matter how much I gave, no matter how hard I tried to earn my seat at the table, to them, I'd always be the girl who got lucky. But Uncle Martin's words snapped me out of that spiral. Would the bride like to say something? And suddenly, I remembered the envelope in my purse. I hadn't meant to bring it to the wedding, but I was glad I did. As soon as Uncle Martin's voice cut through the clinking of glasses and the shallow laughter, the room shifted. Would the bride like to say something? It sounded simple, almost polite, but I felt it like a lightning bolt straight through my spine. My breath hitched. My heart? It was hammering so hard I was sure the guests at the next table could hear it. My skin prickled beneath the lace sleeves of my dress. I suddenly became aware of everything, how tight my heels were, how dry my mouth was, how the corners of my fake smile had started to tremble. I looked around the room. A few heads had turned. Some people looked amused, others curious. But some, especially on Evan's side, looked uncomfortable. Like they hadn't expected me to have a voice. I could feel their whispers moving like smoke, thin, sneaky, suffocating. I told you she was ambitious. She definitely married up. Maybe his dad was right after all. My stomach turned. I turned to look at Evan. He was seated now, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry. He didn't look apologetic. He looked checked out. And that was somehow worse. Say something, I thought. Defend me, tell them they're wrong, but he didn't. He just raised his eyebrows slightly like, "Are you really going to make this a thing?" And for a second, I almost didn't. I almost sank back into that quiet, safe place I'd been taught to live in, where you keep your chin up and let people say whatever they want as long as you keep the peace. But something in me cracked, not in a messy, chaotic way, not the kind that leaves you screaming. Number. This crack was clean, cold, controlled, the kind that says, "Enough." I reached for my clutch, which I'd placed beneath the table next to my chair. My hands shook slightly, but not from fear, from restraint. I knew exactly what I was doing. I opened the flap and slid out the envelope. Simple, unassuming. But inside, power. The deed to the house. Not just any house, our house. The one Evan and I moved into a year ago. The one I had fought for. The one I paid the down payment for, after months of working 14-hour days and skipping every personal luxury imaginable. It was in my name. Not because I had something to prove, but because Evan's credit was trashed and mine wasn't. And when the bank asked who was taking responsibility, I stepped up. Like I always did. I stood. And the envelope in my hand felt heavier than it should have. But maybe that's because it carried more than just a document. It carried the truth. Uncle Martin watched me with quiet pride. I caught my mother's wide eyes across the room. Even she didn't know I'd brought it. As I began to walk toward the front, the crowd began to hush, first in ripples, then in waves, until even the music faded into the background like an afterthought. People were watching now, some with curiosity, some with nervousness, and some, like Gerald, with smug disbelief. What could she possibly say? Their faces seemed to ask. She already had her moment. But they were wrong. My moment hadn't started yet. It was coming. And when it did, no one in that room would forget it. I don't remember deciding to stand. I just remember rising, like something inside me had finally pulled the cord on quiet, on patience, on swallowing every insult for the sake of politeness. The envelope in my hand suddenly felt lighter, or maybe I felt heavier, like every moment I'd stayed silent had gathered in my chest and was finally pushing me forward. The murmurs in the room faded as I walked. One step, another, heels clicking softly on polished marble. The kind of click that usually signals elegance, but in that moment, it sounded like thunder. I didn't look at Gerald, didn't need to. I could feel his gaze trying to burn a hole in my back. Smugness, the disbelief. I didn't look at Evan either, because I already knew what I'd see. Confusion, maybe even embarrassment, but not the kind of regret that would have mattered. All I focused on was the front of the room, the microphone. Uncle Martin had already moved aside. He didn't say anything as I passed him, but he gave me a nod, subtle, strong. The kind of nod that says, "Go ahead, you've earned this." And I had. I stepped up to the mic and adjusted it gently so my voice wouldn't tremble when I spoke. I took a breath, long, deliberate. The kind you take when you're not just trying to calm your nerves, but to slow time, because I wanted them to feel every second of what was coming. The first words out of my mouth weren't angry. "Thank you all," I said, steady and clear, "for being here to celebrate with us." I saw a few confused glances. Some people looked relieved, like maybe I was going to take the high road, let it all slide. But I wasn't here to be gracious. I was here to be honest. I held up the envelope slowly, not with drama, but with purpose. "This," I said, "is the deed to the home Evan and I live in." Now I had their attention. Their silence felt louder than applause. I opened the envelope, pulled out the paper, and let it unfold in my hands like a curtain being drawn. "My name is the only one on this deed," I continued, "because when we bought our house, Evan's credit wasn't in a place where the bank would approve him." Still no reaction from Evan. He was completely still. I paid the down payment. I managed the loan. I signed the papers. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I believed in him. In us now, I looked at Gerald, directly. "I didn't marry for money," I said. "I built my own, and I brought it into this marriage willingly, quietly, because I never needed to be the loudest person in the room to know my worth." A few people gasped. Someone coughed. Another glass clinked from a hand that wasn't steady. "But since it seems there's been confusion," I said, folding the deed and tucking it back into the envelope, "I thought I'd clear that up tonight. No yelling, no scenes, just facts." I set the envelope on the table next to the mic, gave a nod to Uncle Martin, and turned. The walk back felt different, not rushed, not ashamed. It felt like claiming space I'd shrunk away from for too long. People didn't whisper this time. They watched, really watched, because sometimes the loudest thing a woman can do is speak calmly while everyone else expects her to stay silent. As I made my way back to my seat, I didn't rush. I felt every step, felt the eyes locked on me, the weight of silence that had replaced all the smug laughter and polished small talk. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be broken. It was the kind that demanded reflection. And for once, I wasn't the one doing the reflecting. I sat down slowly, smoothing my dress over my knees. My heart was still racing, but not out of fear anymore. It was the rush of release, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for far too long. I looked up. Evan still hadn't moved. His glass was in his hand, resting on his thigh, but he hadn't taken a sip since I started talking. His jaw was tight, his eyes distant. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his father. Gerald looked like someone had dropped cold water down his back. His smirk was gone. His face was rigid. That usual glint of superiority in his eyes had dulled, replaced by something else. Was it discomfort? Shock? Maybe even shame? I didn't need to know, and I didn't need to fix it, because for once, it wasn't mine to fix. Uncle Martin leaned toward me and whispered, Damn proud of you, kid. I smiled, not politely, not out of obligation, but fully. A real, earned smile. The reception resumed, sort of. The music faded back in, hesitant at first, like it was unsure if it had permission to exist again. Guests murmured softly. Some came up to me. Quiet congratulations, subtle acknowledgments. One woman I barely knew from Evan's extended family touched my arm gently and said, "That was incredibly brave." I just nodded. I didn't have words for her. I didn't need any. Across the room, Gerald stood abruptly and left the table. No goodbyes, no grand exit, just disappeared into the hallway. Evan followed a few moments later. I didn't get up. I didn't chase either of them. I stayed seated, soaking in the strange warmth that was beginning to bloom around me. Not from the heat of confrontation, but from the quiet power of reclaiming my space. For so long, I'd bent myself to fit into their world, made myself quieter, smaller, easier. And now, without yelling, without tears, I had shown them who I really was. A woman who didn't need their approval. A woman who owned her place, owned her home, owned herself. Later, Evan returned, alone. He sat beside me, but left a bit of space between our chairs. "I didn't know you brought the deed," he said quietly. "I didn't plan to use it," I replied. He looked at me then. For the first time that night, really looked, and I saw it, that flicker. Guilt. Maybe even regret. "I shouldn't have laughed," he said. No excuses, no justification, just 7 words. I nodded. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I appreciated the honesty. And for now, that was enough. The rest of the evening went on like weddings do. People danced, the cake was cut, more champagne flowed. But the energy had shifted. Not everyone noticed, but the ones who mattered, they did. Because truth has a weight to it. And when you drop it gently, like I did with that deed, it lands with more power than any scream ever could. And in that moment, I wasn't just the bride. I was the woman no one in that room would ever overlook again. I didn't plan to make a statement at my wedding. I didn't dream about dropping receipts or silencing a room. Like most brides, I dreamed about love, about joy, about dancing with bare feet and frosting on my fingers. But sometimes, life gives you a different kind of moment. And if you're lucky, or maybe just tired enough of being underestimated, you'll rise into it. That's what I did. The morning after the wedding, I sat in the quiet of our kitchen, still in my robe, hair messy from tossing all night. The deed sat on the counter, folded neatly beside a half-empty glass of water. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was proud of showing it, but because I finally understood what it meant to own something, not just property, but your voice, your story, your truth. Evan came downstairs eventually, his voice hoarse as he asked if I wanted coffee. I nodded. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to argue about. The silence between us wasn't angry, it was honest. He knew what he'd allowed to happen, and I knew I'd finally stopped allowing it. That was a shift, a permanent one. The days that followed were quiet, almost still. Messages trickled in from friends and distant cousins. Some told me how powerful that moment was. Some just said, respect. Gerald never reached out. Not a text, not a call. And truthfully, I didn't expect him to. You can't force someone to see you if they're determined not to. But I no longer felt the need to convince anyone. I realized something standing in that room, holding that deed. I had spent so much energy proving I belonged in Evan's world, working harder, smiling wider, staying quiet when I wanted to scream, all to be good enough. But I was already enough. I always had been. They just couldn't see it, or wouldn't. But Liam, my little cousin who watched from the back of the room with wide eyes, he saw. So did my mother, who grabbed my hand later that night and said, "I don't think I've ever been so proud of you." And Uncle Martin? He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His presence spoke louder than any toast. I started this marriage hoping I'd gain a new family. And maybe I still will. Maybe with time, things will change. But whether they do or not, I'm not going to dim myself again. Not to be accepted. Not to keep peace. Because peace bought with silence isn't peace. It's permission. And I've taken that permission back. I look at that deed now and I don't see a house. I see every late night I spent working, every fear I pushed through, every time I chose to bet on myself when no one else did. I see the woman I became when I finally stopped waiting for validation and stood in my own power. And now? Now I live in a house that I bought, with a name I earned, and a voice I no longer apologize for. Not bad for a gold digger, huh?